Hello, welcome back to The World Today on France 24. I'm Karis Garland. Thanks for joining us. Here's a look at our headlines. France is marking 10 years since the terrorist attacks on the Charlie Hebdo newspaper, which left 12 people dead, a massacre that led to an outpouring of grief and also marked the beginning of a wave of Islamist violence in the country. And in our Perspective segment, we speak to a journalist and filmmaker who witnessed the immediate aftermath of that attack, arriving on the scene before first responders. This Tuesday marks 10 years since two Islamist gunmen stormed into the office of French newspaper Charlie Hebdo and killed 12 people. It's believed the two Paris-born brothers of Algerian descent were seeking some form of revenge after the satirical weekly published caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad, Islam's most revered figure. It was an attack that sparked sympathy and a wave of solidarity with the Je suis Charlie movement. It also marked the first of many jihadists or Islamist-inspired attacks in France and Europe. Well, to commemorate 10 years since the attack, Charlie Hebdo has released a special 32-page edition, and in its typically provocative style features a cartoon contest mocking God. Yinka Oyotade has more on that anniversary edition.
Exactly 10 years on from the deadly terror attack on its offices, Charlie Hebdo wants to show it's uncowed and still provoking. To commemorate the anniversary, the French satirical newspaper publishing this special edition, the word indestructible splashed across the front page. Its dark humour still very much alive, and so is the pain of that fateful day.
It's a shame. It's a shame what happened. It shouldn't happen. Freedom of the press, freedom of expression. We're in France. We have the right to say everything.
That's the message the satirical weekly wants to pass on in its latest edition. Inside, it's published 40 winning entries from a cartoons competition it organised, calling for artists to mock God and religious leaders. The paper also reprinted its controversial depiction of Prophet Muhammad, a cartoon that triggered the attack by jihadist gunmen in 2015, which left 8 staff members dead. Charlie Hebdo is undeterred, but this cartoonist says the industry did not survive the massacre unscathed.
It's quite strange because after 2015, cartoonists were regarded as heroes of democracy, but it all died down very quickly. And if you look at the sales of Charlie Hebdo and newspapers in general, you can see that the dust settled very quickly. Now it's coming back with the 10th anniversary. It's a bit of a shame that we have to take an interest in cartoons only when we remember the attacks.
This week's edition will also feature a survey carried out by IFOP on attitudes in France towards press freedom. It found that 76% of respondents believe freedom of expression and the freedom to caricature were fundamental rights, while 62% think people have the right to mock religious beliefs.
Earlier, we spoke to our reporter Catherine Norris-Trent, who was standing outside a Kosher supermarket in Paris, the site of another linked attack after that of Charlie Hebdo. This was ahead of a tribute to the victims.
Already this morning, we've got some bunches of flowers, tributes which have been left outside the Kosher supermarket here on the eastern city limits of Paris in tribute to the 4 people who were killed here when one of the Islamists, Ahmadi Koulibaly, held them during a 4-hour siege before himself being killed. So here at the moment, we've seen a few people coming to look at the flowers, but it's pretty quiet. We're right near a busy roadway here in Paris and people are heading off to work. Later on, though, the mood will turn very somber. We're awaiting commemorations here, minutes of silence, attended by President Emmanuel Macron, the Mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, and families of those kills, as well as perhaps some of the survivors of the attacks will be gathered here to pay tribute 10 years after these attacks, which really rocked France. Before that, there are going to be commemorations outside the former headquarters of the satirical newspaper, Charlie Hebdo, and at a location near there where a police officer was shot dead. So it's set to be a somber morning and one that will reflect the mood, I think, in France 10 years after these attacks.
Well, today's Perspective guest was there in the immediate aftermath of that attack on the Charlie Hebdo offices. Paul Moreira is a journalist and filmmaker. His office was directly in front of Charlie Hebdo's. He arrived at the scene even before first responders and helped the survivors later in a bid to better understand what had happened and what goes on in the minds of jihadists more generally. He produced a documentary called ISIS, Birth of a Monster. Paul Moreira joins us now. Thank you very much for speaking to us on France 24.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'd like to start first by going back to 10 years ago. Can you tell us what you remember about the events of January 7th, 2015?
I was outside, and then I got a call on my telephone of someone from the production telling me that there were people with guns within the building. Our offices were just next door to Charlie. It was really the door right in front of Charlie. And so I mean, the lady who called me, she didn't know who it could be. I had no doubt right away that it was for Charlie. And I run. I was on my motorcycle, so I rode back as fast as possible. And I slipped between the first responders. I remember entering the building. I saw the dead body of the gentleman from the maintenance of the building. He was dead. And I remember thinking, because I'd been in war areas many times in my life, and I remember seeing his body and having this flash of Baghdad casualty mornings where you find the bodies in the streets. And it was like, wow, it's happening right in front of my door now. And I ran up the stairs. The stairs were full of blood, really. And I saw that there were the first responders in Charlie's office. So I thought, I'm just going to be a problem here, a nuisance. So I run into my editing room, and I went to meet the survivors of Charlie. I met Laurent Léger. I met I think it was Coco, the girl. Fortunately, I had to open the door to the killers under the menace of under the threat of a weapon. And no, it was as you can imagine, it was a surreal moment. I was at the feeling that I was going to wake up. I mean, I was like Zelensky, those are the people I grew up with. You know, it's like when we were kids, I used to read the Charlie Hebdo and have a good laugh with their drawing. They were working in a show. The first show I worked in when I started working on TV. The show's name was Droit de Réponse, and they were doing those drawings live during the show. So it was just like part of my infancy that was killed on the spot, right on the doorstep of the place where I worked. So I remember utter shock. I remember Patrick Pelou, who is this doctor who was friends with most of the people working at Charlie, and he was crying in the arms of a fireman. And I remember seeing him crying, and I was like, wow, he's 8 years old again. And everybody was like thrown back to their childhood, really. That I have no other metaphor to express the utter shock that we were going through.
Well, after the attack, and once the emotion had sort of settled in, and that you realized that okay, this is real, how did you feel? Did you feel scared? Did you have the feeling that these kinds of attacks were about to become more common?
Yes, my first fear was, I mean, we all know that ISIS and Al Qaeda's political project is to polarize our societies as much as possible and to use the wounds and the gaps and the fractures that exist within our society, namely between, for example, Muslims and non-Muslims. We all know that the situation is tense in certain areas of the country. And I was very afraid that the aftermath of the attack would be basically something looking like a civil war, like Muslims fighting Christians and Jews. And I mean, of course, this was a fear of hours before the attack, because it was huge. I mean, the way we felt it was like, it is incredible, and we knew that Al Qaeda and Daesh would want to exploit those fractures. And what happened after was this huge demonstration, the 11th of January demonstration. It was a very, for us that were like first line in this terror attack, it was a very healing moment, because it was a moment where France was saying, we are above that. I mean, we are united, Muslims, Christians, Jews, non-believers, whatever. We are united for what we believe, that is the DNA of this country, which is tolerance and religious tolerance.
And do
and
you
then
think,
there were,
sorry to interrupt, but I was going to ask, obviously we saw a huge show of solidarity after these attacks, and do you think that it's still the case that France is still saying we are above this and we are a tolerant society in today's terms?
no, I think we're not as tolerant as we were before 2015. I think tensions have arose, but it's not only in France, unfortunately. It's a moment all over the planet where people are thrown back to their identities and are more and more prone to be intolerant. I mean, just as an example, we were fighting for the right. Freedom of expression was really at the center of the demonstrations and everything, and all the statements that were made after. And when you think about it, a guy like Guillaume Meurice, who was a humorist in France Inter, was kicked out for maybe a tasteless joke, but just a joke about Benjamin Netanyahu. So there is something that we fought for. And this 11th of January 2025, that is, I think, slowly vanishing in our landscape.
And what do you think about the special edition that Charlie Hebdo released this Tuesday?
Well, I think it's a good idea to promote. I think there's a contest of drawings, and it's good. It's good that they exist. It's good that they keep on. I know because I have friends within the paper that tensions arose, and it's very difficult to go through an experience like that. We were attacked in 2020 by a Pakistani terrorist, and we had two people from our agency that were very gravely wounded, and it triggered a crisis. And it's something that this level of violence is something that is very difficult to be resilient from. So, but they succeeded. Charlie is still here, and I think it's good. For me, it was very important after the attack to keep on doing films about jihadists, to keep on. I mean, my life was defined by this attack, those attacks, because I think Bataclan was also very important in 2015. The next 10 years were defined by that, because I spent like almost 100% of my time either investigating Daesh. We infiltrated a cell in France, or going to Raqqa. We were, I think, the only ones that filmed was for Arte, a film that is still, you can still see it on YouTube, Foreign Volunteers. We went to Raqqa with the people who were fighting the Islamic State. We stayed until the very last bullet of the very last battle, and I wanted to expose the tricks and the lies of and the way they were manipulating young kids in the suburbs. And I wanted to show that some people were fighting them and were able to be victorious. And because there was this very strong feeling of they are unstoppable. And I just wanted to show that they were not unstoppable.
All right, Paul Moreira.
And we should not lose the core of our identity, which is the freedom of speech.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Paul Moreira, journalist and filmmaker, for speaking to us on the anniversary of those attacks.